Hello, hello. Welcome to my safe space. I'm Lena. Here I talk about my childhood traumas and how they affected me in my adulthood. I have experienced child sexual abuse, abandonment, emotional abuse, physical abuse, and neglect. If you would like to know my story, you can watch my first video right here. In today's video, I want to talk about the steps I took to heal from my childhood traumas. I consider CSA trauma the most damaging to my mental health, and the second most damaging trauma being abandonment by my mother. I want to start by saying that I healed on my own. I was informally diagnosed with CPTSD, which is a complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and GAD, which is generalized anxiety disorder, by a psychiatrist. And I failed, if you can say that, many depression tests. While you may think that this means I received treatment by a psychiatrist, I did not. It is a long story, but basically my psychiatrist had dementia and he couldn't provide adequate care. But in those moments of mind clarity that he had, he was able to at least tell me what he thinks I needed to be treated for, the informal diagnosis I mentioned, the CPTSD and the GAD. We even started an EMDR treatment, but quickly stopped because he wasn't able to do it properly due to his illness. When I tried to find another doctor, I couldn't. We have a lot of military people in the area, and every doctor specializing in PTSD and CPTSD has a filled-up schedule years in advance. I talked to a mental counselor at the Pentagon where my husband used to work. I talked to her once a week for about 3 months. She had lots of knowledge, but no actual degree to be able to treat me the way I needed to be treated. But I did find it helpful, and if that's all I could get in the future, I would do it again. So those were the only two professionals I ever talked to about my traumas. I don't have an official diagnosis because it's not as simple as just telling the patient what they might have. But I think it is pretty safe to assume, given my past, that I have CPTSD. Plus, of course, I got the verbal diagnosis from the psychiatrist I initially went to. I showed every symptom for CPTSD for many years, and I can now say I'm in a much better place than I've ever been. I'm careful not to say I'm fully healed because maybe I will relapse in the future, because I have once. But I know for a fact that this is the best I have ever felt in terms of my mental health. So I consider myself healed, just not cured. Not sure if it's even possible to be cured in my case. Anyway, let's talk about the steps that I took to heal from my childhood traumas. I analyzed everything that I did, and I came up with this 5-step system of healing from my childhood traumas, and I'm going to be sharing this system with you today. Step 1 for me was remembering. I started remembering all the mistreatment I received growing up. Because of that Russian movie I watched at 28, Bury Me Under the Baseboard, I started remembering how my grandma was yelling at me, calling me names every day, insulting my mother, etc. This was the beginning phase of my remembering stage. I never forgot my dad sexually abusing me, but I forgot my grandmother abusing me emotionally. And to be quite honest, I just thought it was normal to behave the way she did. And up until that point, I was even mimicking her. I was nearly as nasty as she was, and remembering how she made me feel when I was under her care hit me like a bag of rocks. When I realized that I was a scapegoat in my family, I also realized that I didn't actually want to be sexually abused by my dad. Because for a long time, I thought if I let it happen for 4 or 5 years, there must be something wrong with me and I wanted it. But when I remembered my childhood and how badly mistreated I was, I realized that there was nothing else I could do but to oblige. I realized that the lack of love and support from my grandparents made me a perfect victim for my dad. It made me vulnerable, which in turn made me realize that it was not my fault and that I didn't deserve it. All it came to me later, but for now, this was just the first step, remembering the abuse done by my grandparents, or specifically my grandmother. It's just that those two types of abuse I lived through are closely related. No pun intended. Step two was admitting. I had to admit that the way I was raised was wrong. By 28, I met more people with different backgrounds. I saw people with loving families. I started realizing that the way I was raised was extraordinary. I know that my experience is not unique because there are far too many children abused emotionally, physically, and sexually. But at the time, admitting that I wasn't raised in a normal, mentally healthy family was a big revelation. Not that I didn't know any of this, I just didn't admit it to myself. I was in denial. I admitted to myself that I was abused by my grandmother and by my dad. I admitted to myself that I was a victim, not an accomplice. I admitted to myself that all this had affected me in more ways than I thought. And I admitted to myself that I wasn't all right and something had to be done. Of course, at the time, I had no money to support myself, let alone pay for therapy. I was a single immigrant girl with no prospects and no hope for a better future in a still foreign country. So I had to come up with the next step in my healing journey. Step three was internalizing. This was a very important step. I don't think without it I would be able to heal at all. Here's the thing. If all I did was remember and admit, I would just be sour. I would just continue living my life feeling bad for myself and hating my family. And if I did that, I would make no progress. Feeling bad for yourself can either make you or break you. You can either drown in your own tears and be forever sad and forgotten, or you could use your empathy for yourself as a driver to kickstart your healing process. I felt bad for myself for a short while, and then I got angry. I got angry at how I was mistreated and how it affected my mental health. And that's when I understood that if I continue letting my trauma make me who I am, it's going to win. I need to take over my own mind, my body, my feelings, everything, do a complete makeover. That's when internalizing began. I started noticing the way I was acting or feeling, and I started thinking about possible reasons why I act that way or why something bothers me. I started comparing my now persona to my pre-trauma persona. Was this feeling genuine? Or was it caused by years of childhood trauma? Was I really bothered by this thing someone said to me? Or did it remind me of what my grandma used to say to me? Or did it trigger my abandonment issues in me? Can I explain my behavior because I was driven by my own feelings? Or was I driven by my trauma and acted out? It wasn't easy for a while. I would only remember to do this every now and then. But eventually, I saw how much it helped me, and I couldn't help but internalize more and more. I made it pretty much a habit. I think what helped me was watching a bunch of videos about mental health and reading books about mental health, traumas, and all that stuff. The more I learned about it, the easier it became to understand myself. And I know what some people think about this. They think I was self-diagnosing, and maybe I was, but it helped me. Whether there was a real connection to my abuse or it was a part of my actual personality, I may never know. But what I do know is that internalizing helped me become a better person. Not to be liked by others, I never really cared about that, but to like myself. I didn't like myself for the majority of my life, but I like myself now. I actually love myself now. Step 4 was impersonation. What do I mean by that? Once I saw what I didn't like about myself, and once I knew what caused me to be that person, I knew what to change to be me. I knew I wasn't acting how I wanted to act. For example, I was mean to new employees at work. It didn't matter who you were. If you were new, I didn't like you and made sure you knew. I would catch myself thinking, I actually like this girl, but she's new, so I gotta make sure not to be nice to her. That was me before I made the previous 3 steps. After step 3, internalizing, I realized that I was mean to new hires because my dad would be mean to people he just met. He would say, I don't like you until you prove me wrong. And I repeated the same mantra. Once it finally occurred to me that I was doing the same thing because that's how my dad acted and not because I wanted to be like that, I turned it around and changed my views 180 degrees. Now I would say, I like you until you prove me wrong. I let myself be me instead of forcing myself to be my dad. I would find all these behaviors that I copied from my grandma and my dad, the ones I deemed negative, and I would intentionally stop engaging in them. I start listening to my inner voice more. What do I want? What do I like? What do I dislike? What bothers me? Once I found answers to those questions, I started impersonating my true self. I started doing what my true self would do. My old trauma-driven self would never say a compliment to a stranger. I forced myself to say a compliment to a stranger the first time I did it. I made myself do it, and I liked it. I started doing it more, and now I do it all the time. My old self was smoking cigarettes and got drunk in public. My true self quit smoking cold turkey and never got sloppy drunk again. It was so easy for me to quit smoking that I'm convinced I didn't want to smoke in the first place. But I smoked because I rebelled against my abusers. When I realized they were the reason I was smoking and how stupid it all sounded now, I quit immediately. This is what I mean by impersonation. You pretend to be the person you once were or a person you want to be until you don't have to pretend anymore because now you are that person. I'm sure I have more work to do. This is not a finished process, but I've made big progress and changed a lot since. I attribute my second marriage to this change. If I behaved the same way I was behaving before my true self took over, I would never be able to score my husband. He would simply not be interested in a mean, rude, always angry woman who smokes and drinks and doesn't hold any values he can relate to. And vice versa. I think he's successful, handsome, smart, he's definitely mentally healthy, and he's about my age. If it wasn't my true self who picked him, I would marry some abusive loser again. Former victims of abuse attract and pick abusers because it's what they know. It's familiar, it's safe. But it really isn't safe, as I'm sure you know. We just can't see straight when our traumas take over us. Our job is not to let it win. Step 5 is to love yourself. As cliche as it sounds, it is also a fundamental and the last step in the healing journey I made. It may sound impossible to someone in their first or second step of the way, but by the step 3, it becomes easier to see all the reasons to love yourself for. When you start internalizing, you start seeing yourself for who you really are. You understand yourself better, and now you can explain why you behave a certain way or why you had those negative feelings or thoughts. You become more empathetic towards yourself because now you know that your traumas made you this person, but you don't have to be this person. You can reclaim your true self. And during this final step that is actually concurrent with the fourth step and isn't necessarily consecutive, when you start acting like a true self and then consequentially become your true self, then you suddenly start to like yourself. You realize, damn, I can actually be myself. I can actually not let trauma take over me and my mind. And this realization motivates you to keep going. You find out that life is worth living when you win. And when life is worth living, you make better choices for yourself because now there is you in your future. Suddenly, you want to see what else you can do with these new superpowers. But in my case, there was one important obstacle on my way on reaching the finish line. I still had my abuser in my life. I saw my dad in 2020. I was in Ukraine for just 2 weeks, and he still managed to give me 3 days of silent treatment during that visit. 3 days out of 14 towards the end, he didn't talk to me at all. I still don't know why, but I think it's because I didn't stay with him the entire time and left to meet my friends now and then. Shortly after that, I blocked him and we haven't talked since. A year after that, I relapsed. I started thinking badly of myself. I started catastrophizing. I became depressed. That's when I was looking for a therapist and had no luck. So I basically had to follow the same steps again, starting with step 1, remembering. Except this time, I remembered more. I went really deep into my memories. At first, it wasn't intentional, and I would be haunted by flashback, disgusting memories of my abuse. I would try to get them out of my head, but they would come back. They would just torture me. Eventually, I had to do what I did the first time around. I started admitting to myself that my abuse was really that bad, and all those nasty things did happen, and there is no way I can change that about my past. So all there is to do is to admit I was affected by the abuse deeply and that I need to make effort to not let my traumas take over me again. Finally, I started internalizing and shortly after impersonating. Those steps are more intentional and therefore they're less painful. And they didn't take nearly as long as the first time. I already had a path made in the past. I just walked off it and had to find it again. The shock from this separation from my abuser was a blessing in disguise. Even though I had to follow the steps again, starting from the very beginning, this time I did it intentionally with the map in mind. I already marked all the landmarks previously, and following the same path was making it more sure-footed. So in the future, if I relapse again, I'll know what to do. In no way I'm trying to say that this is easy. It wasn't easy at all. At some point, I asked my husband to hide the guns from me. I knew how I felt the last time I was processing my reality. This time, it came crushing me like never before, and I got really scared. I thought if I feel so much worse now, then I must end up a lot worse than before. But through internalization and then impersonation, I became my true self again. I think when I cut my dad out of my life, I lived through a grieving stage. Because only a year later, after I hung up on him, did I admit that I was never gonna talk to him again. I wrote many letters to him, but never mailed them. I have no intention to talk to him in the future. The only time I'm planning to ever see him again is when he is in the coffin or already buried. I mentally buried him that time when I relapsed. I lived through it, I grieved, and I let go. I didn't forgive him, and I don't feel the need to. I am done with him, and even when I have flashbacks now, I don't care. I know what they are. They're just memories at this point. Sometimes I remember positive moments involving my dad when we laughed really hard at something. I don't call those flashbacks. Those are memories. So I learned to treat my flashbacks as memories. They come and go. I don't focus on them. None of them are new anymore. I processed them a while back and I moved on. But this is basically my 5-step system of how I healed from my childhood traumas. I followed it twice, and it got me through my worst times faster and more effectively the second time. Maybe if I relapse again, the third time I do this, I will reincarnate or something. That would be neat. With this, I'm going to finish today's deep dive. Here is another video on my channel that you might be interested in watching. I make deep dives into my childhood traumas and how they affect my mental health in adulthood. If you're interested in watching my new videos, make sure to hit the notification bell so you will be notified when I post next, presumably next Saturday at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. Thanks for watching and have a great week. Bye.